Thank you everyone for joining us. And we have a very special guest, our founder and CEO, Soumyadeb, on the webinar. Welcome, Soumyadeb.
Thanks, Eric. Glad to be here doing this with you.
Great. Well, today we're going to talk about what a CDP for developers is. A little background on this. So last week we announced that we raised a Series A from Kleiner Perkins, which is a huge milestone for our company. S28 Capital and Uncorrelated Ventures also participated. And we announced that what we're building is what we're calling a CDP for developers. And so we're going to talk about lots of different things, including the history of CDPs, and then we're going to end with the future of what we're building at RudderStack, and lots of things in between. Here's a brief agenda of what we'll cover, just so you can keep in mind what we're going to chat about and start thinking of some questions. So we'll talk about history of CDPs. We'll also talk about really what's a goal of using customer data and how it's changed from a marketing use case to optimizing all parts of the business. And then a particular passion of ours is the subject of why engineering needs to own the data stack, which is a controversial topic, but one that we love to talk about and one that Soumyadeb has extensive experience in. Then we'll dig into what a CDP for developers is. We'll talk about two really key components of RudderStack, which is why we're open source and we're warehouse first. We'll talk about what warehouse first means in the context of a CDP. We'll run through some key developer-focused features, and then Soumyadeb's going to tell us what's coming up for RudderStack as we look at the next couple of years. So without further ado, Soumyadeb, do you want to give us just a brief background on yourself and what led you to founding RudderStack a little over 2 years ago?
Yeah, sure, Eric. So yeah, we started RudderStack in June 2019, as Eric said. But I have been working in this broad space for almost 8 years. Prior to RudderStack, I spent a year in a company called 8x8, and what I was mostly doing at 8x8 was to build a stack very similar to RudderStack. Right? We are trying to pull all the customer data, build machine learning models on top for various business use cases, all the way from lead scoring to churn prediction to upsell prediction and so on. And some of the experiences doing that led me to start RudderStack. There is no tool which could really satisfy the requirements at 8x8. And yeah, I thought it makes sense to start RudderStack. Prior to 8x8, I spent 5 years doing a startup in the B2B marketing space. I'll not get into the details, but one thing I really learned there was marketing teams only have a limited view of customer data, which makes sense because they don't control all the properties through which customers interact with enterprises interact with customers. And that is the reason we strongly believe, and that is the hypothesis I developed in my previous company, that engineering needs to own this, as we'll talk later about in details. Yeah, so that's my high-level background.
Great. And I'm Eric Dodds, and I run growth at RudderStack. But this is about Soumyadeb, so I won't give my background. We'll get into that a little bit actually in this section. So let's talk about a brief history of customer data platforms. So I can speak to this a little bit. So my background's actually in marketing. So I started my career in marketing, and really it's funny looking at this chart, thinking back to 2011. I remember being a digital marketer in 2011, and I remember just being really excited about software. And then as subsequent years passed, the software seemed to keep getting better and better and to do more things and more things. But the acceleration is pretty crazy to go from a couple hundred tools to 7,000 tools in less than a decade is pretty insane. And so there was almost a whiplash in the industry where the options are almost overwhelming, and you kind of struggled even to figure out which tool to pick for the job. But there's a really specific reason why this dynamic happened in the MarTech landscape with marketing tools specifically. And I'll speak to this a little bit, and then would love to hear your perspective on it, Soumyadeb. Really, marketing was the tip of the iceberg in terms of using customer data. right? So marketing teams, in order to optimize campaigns, as they were able to collect more first-party data, use third-party data, they wanted to optimize the top of the funnel to drive traffic, understand user behavior in their websites and apps, et cetera, and then also orchestrate, the customer journey. And in order to do that, really the first breed was sort of all-in-one tools that kind of did everything, right? I mean, even from your website to your email campaigns, everything lived in one place. But that created systems that were sort of good at a number of things, but not excellent at a specific part of the puzzle. And that created point solutions, right? So companies that really were excellent at email marketing, but they also created data silos, right? They were really good at one thing, but they created a data silo, which made it hard to share the data with other teams and other tools. And that kind of led to an integrated MarTech stack where people were using best of breed tools that talk to each other, right? So this is sort of the more modern generation of, Salesforce and Pardot and, integrating HubSpot and Salesforce, et cetera, where your tools are talking to each other in a very integrated way. But even still, all of your data lived in different parts of the tech stack. Even though they could talk to each other, you didn't have a unified data layer. So Soumyadeb, talk us through sort of the integrated MarTech stack with best of breed actually led to needing data layer tooling and kind of created a lot of confusion in the marketplace as that happened.
Yeah, I mean, this was like a really an interesting journey that, like, as you were saying, that MarTech took, right, from point solutions, everything in one bucket, to all these different tools. And the challenge with that approach, though, was, as you pointed out rightly, is how do you get your data in all those tools, right? You have one tool for emailing, maybe another tool for your newsletter, one other tool for your like push notification, one for your CRM, one for your like some other marketing, and so on. And you have like 7 tools that need to have customer data. And each tool also, there is some feedback, right? So let's say you sent an email, you got a response back, and based on that response, you want to take some other action, right? You want to send a push notification, and then so on. So that became a real mess, right? I mean, now you got point solutions which are very good at each task, but how do you like make sure, firstly, that your customer data is synced to all of them, right? Every time a record is created, like somebody signs up, you have to sync that customer record to like Salesforce and your Marketo and your push notification tool and so on, right? So this was never an easy task, right? I mean, like what people did was like they built like points integrations, that you'll like send one SDK for your Salesforce and some other like form for Marketo and so on. And then like your website did not load properly, and that's why like record made it to Salesforce, but it never made it to Marketo. Like all these kind of weird problems happened because of this silo of like best of breed tools. And that is the problem that like Segments and the Teliums of the world tried to solve, right? I mean, they said like, okay, I mean, there is this confusion, getting data across to all of them consistently is a problem. So like just send it to us, and then we'll make sure that everything goes to all the tools properly. So yeah, they definitely added a lot of value. And that's why like you see like looking at Segments like growth and trajectory and like an eventual acquisition. And same for Telium, I guess, like they're like a similar solution, mostly focused on enterprises, but they're doing very well.
And on top of that, and really at the same time, I think you saw a proliferation of CDPs that fall more on unified customer profiles and then sort of customer journey orchestration, right? So the Action IQs, Blueconics, et cetera. And it's funny because even though, they fall into the same CDP category, they're really less about the data collection and more about actually actioning on the data, right? So making sure that you have really robust customer profiles, and then being able to do all sorts of automation, right? Actually orchestrating your customer journey where people are getting emails and messages and push notifications and all that sort of stuff. But that led to a lot of confusion in the marketplace, right? And so it's pretty common for, you to see blog posts around CDPs and, CDPs for all different purposes, et cetera. And of course, we are in that space as well, which we'll talk about more. But one thing I wanted to talk through was, despite the confusion, the goal of what companies are trying to do with the data layer and with the activation tools is really the same. And every business is trying to optimize across business functions with customer data, right? So we talked about marketing being the tip of the iceberg when it came to optimizing their function with customer data. And now we're seeing every single team across the organization, including finance, have a huge hunger for customer data and first-party data because they need to optimize. Do you want to talk a little bit to that, Soumyadeb?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And like, I kind of firsthand saw that at 8x8. And for people who don't know, 8x8 is like one of the like largest VoIP telecom providers, like a public company. And they're like data silos, right? I mean, we had a mobile app, which was generating a lot of like our customers are very using to like make phone calls and text messages and so on, right? So there was a lot of customer data being generated in our mobile app. Then we had our billing system, and we had our own homegrown CRM system and so on. So there are multiple sources of data, and each function wanted to get access to that data. So of course, marketing, like they wanted to like customize journeys based on what people were doing in the apps, right? So that made sense. And a lot of the CDPs were trying to solve that problem, right? How do you like define customer journeys and like create that single customer view? But the use case of customer data was well beyond marketing, as I kind of learned at 8x8. Next big use case was support, right? I mean, we had over 100,000 customers using our phone systems, and support really wanted to know like which customers are likely to churn, which are the red customers. And it is very, like they used like a tool called Gainsight, but I mean, Gainsight is a great, powerful tool, but like the biggest missing block was we did not have any integration from our sources of data, which was all over the place, as I mentioned, from the event stream to like from the app to like our billing system to our like our backend system into the support Gainsight tool. And this was important because like, let's say, what is support interested in? Who are the customers who are going to churn? Now, we found that the best predictor of churn is somebody's phone usage going down, right, over time, right, sending less messages, less text, and so on. So that data comes from the app itself. But at the same time, another great feature for predicting who will churn or not is our ticketing data, right, which was on Sales Cloud. So bringing everything into Gainsight was very important, so that the customer success team now has view of like which customers are going to churn, right? So that integration was missing, and like they really wanted that customer data. Now, if you go beyond like support to like product, of course, product wanted to know where are like who is using the product, who is not. But like finance was another great example, right? I mean, like pricing the product was a constant debate in the company, right? I mean, it's always a problem in every company, like of our stage, like to public companies like 8x8. Are we like rightly pricing the product? Like we had a free tier which was like being used like which had up to some call limits, and then like there was an unlimited tier and so on. So how do you find out if you are pricing the product correctly? The best way to do that is like understand like at each tier, what are you charging for and how are they using the product? But like to do that, you need to have product data coming in, right? The usage data, how many calls, how many texts, and so on, right? So that integration was very important, like getting that data into some kind of a warehouse so that our finance team could now build out those models, right? So yeah, I mean, like this is just another example to highlight that the use cases of customer data are not just about marketing and like sending emails. It impacts every function of the business.
And one thing you have talked about in that experience is that you shopped around for a bunch of different tools to see if you could find a solution to the problem, and had the realization that when you think about a CDP, it's really not a single vendor. It's actually a collection of tools that are both internal and external that you have to build into sort of a complete customer data stack.
Yeah, 100%. In fact, like, I mean, like since this is a public thing, I mean, I don't think I should like discuss much more about like what tool we ended up at 8x8. But like one thing I learned during that process of like evaluating vendors to like bring all that customer data was like, yeah, there is no single solution which like could do that, right? I mean, and what I mean by that, just to reiterate what I mentioned before, is your customer data is all over the place, right? It is being generated in your mobile app, where your people are making the phone calls and so on. It is being generated in your backend billing system. It is there in your ticketing system, and some of it is like on SaaS, some of it is in your database, in your homegrown data center, and so on, right? So that your customer data is all over the place, and bringing everything together into one place to like do all these use cases that I talked about was like, there was no single vendor which could do that properly. Just bringing the data together is what I'm talking about. And then the second piece of that was like, once the data is in and you build some of these like use cases, right? I mean, like, good example is like, let's say I build a churn prediction use case, right? What I was talking about, right? And you based on all this data, you build some model to predict who are the customers who are going to churn. That whatever churn score needs to be synced back into the Gainsight, right? So it's not just about pulling the data into a place, but also like taking that output and sending it to the different tools in there. And so there are a bunch of vendors who had like excelled in point solutions, right? One for event stream, one for like this database pulling, one for cloud pulling, one for the reverse part, but there was no single vendor. I mean, buying 4 different vendors, each one, they may not be talking to each other, they may have different formats, was like a big mess.
Sure. So that's why at RudderStack, one of our core beliefs is that engineering needs to own the CDP. So tell us why that is. I mean, CDP traditionally has been a marketing term, but we're pretty convinced that modern companies, and really we see this with our customers, engineering is increasingly owning the customer data stack.
Yeah, I mean, like I kind of find it funny that CDP the term CDP has been taken over by the marketing orgs, and the vendors who talk about CDP are only selling to marketing. When I think about like, if we step back and think about like customer data and so on, right? Like again, going back to the use case that I was talking about, like what exactly is a CDP supposed to do, right? A customer data platform. But I mean, if you didn't know anything about CDP and if we heard this term like a customer data platform, what would you expect it to do? Like, it should bring all the customer data into one single place, right? I mean, it should help you collect all that data, and then it should empower you to build interesting use cases on top of that data, whether it's analytics, whether it's machine learning, whether it's simple audience creation, and so on. And then it should enable you to like activate that data, right? Take that output and send it to all these different systems where you want that data to be sent to, right? So that's how I think about like CDP, right? I mean, if you've heard for the first time. Now, and as I was saying, the use cases for CDP are all over the place, right? I mean, it's not just marketing, but like support and finance and then every function of the business. Now, going back to your question around like, why should engineering team own the CDP? Like, if you look at all these different sources we are talking about, right? Whether it's the mobile apps, whether it's the website, whether it's the app, whether it's the backend database, whether it's the cloud database, right? Like, who has access to all these systems? Who is responsible for managing all these systems? Marketing team doesn't, right? I mean, they don't care about like your backend billing system or they don't even control a lot of these systems, right? They have no visibility into or no power over these like mobile apps and the web apps. That is controlled by the engineering team. So if you look at an org, who is in the best position to like at least build integrations and figure out how to bring that data? It is the engineering team, like whether it's the IT engineering. I mean, you can argue about that, but it cannot be marketing. It cannot be finance. It has to be like engineering and some function of that, right? So it was almost like a no-brainer that the engineering team has to own the CDP.
Absolutely. Okay, so engineering needs to own the CDP, and at RudderStack, we're building a CDP for developers. So talk through what a CDP for developers actually is. This is just a high-level definition that we pulled together, but would just love to hear in your own words, Soumyadeb, what is a CDP for developers?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny that we have to qualify that it is a CDP for developers. I mean, like in my mind, like CDP should be built by developers, right? There should not be like, there should be a special category as CDP for marketing, and maybe there should be some vendors in that. But like CDP, like, I mean, if we talk about platforms, I mean, it should be CDP. CDP should be for developers. But anyway, since we don't control the category and like other great people have defined this, we have to define like what is a CDP for developer. So we don't have to, like, when we have kind of laid it out here, but like the core idea is like a platform which enables developers to bring all this customer data together and build all these kind of interesting use cases that I talked about, all the way from analytics to machine learning, and then like take that output and then like send it to all the downstream consumers of the data, whether it's like marketing and so on. So that's how we think about like a CDP or a CDP for developers.
And as a developer yourself, why is it important for you, and I see this in our product roadmap and just what we've built already, why is it important for you for the CDP sort of workflow to integrate with existing dev workflows? Because in a lot of cases, well, I would say in most cases, when you think about CDP options in the marketplace, you're logging into a UI and you're clicking around a UI to sort of, you know, execute a lot of the actions that you do as you interact with the tool.
Yeah, that's a great question. And like, so it kind of boils down to like, what does a developer do? Like, how does a developer work? So let's kind of, to answer that question, let's kind of take a concrete example, right? Let's say I'm trying to build a lead scoring model, just for the sake of it. So, and then I have this platform, which is like pulling all the data from like your apps, and it's also pulling your CRM data and like all the other sources of data into some single place, whether it's like a data warehouse or like a data lake, doesn't matter, like some single place. And then I have this awesome lead scoring model that I deployed on top of that data. And then it predicts a score, and then that score has to be sent back to CRM, some kind of a CRM system, right? So like, if like, ignore the CDP part. I mean, if I'm building an end-to-end system like that, right? I mean, it's not easy to like build and deploy and maintain and keep that system running, right? So there are like this is like data pipelines. I mean, as engineers, I've been a data engineer all my life, right? So data engineers have kind of figured out a way to run these pipelines and like version control and like make sure that really release process. So there is like a process that you have to go through to run these applications reliably and in a stable manner, right? So that's why. To give you another concrete example, right? I mean, like when you are running a data pipeline, you want that pipeline to be integrated with your like paging system, so that if something is broken, you want a page call or like page duty or whatever, right? That something is broken. I like as a developer, I'm used to monitoring my infrastructure in like tools like Grafana or Datadog and so on, like to just see how things are working. I mean, those are the tools I'm like used to. So your customer data pipeline and the applications developed on top cannot be any different, right? It's very important that it kind of works with all the tools, whether it's even Git, right? I mean, if I'm committing code and like that platform is running some code for me, I want that to be integrated with my Git workflow, so that I mean I can do code reviews and all that stuff, right? So API first, like integration with Git, like I mean, like all these paging integrations, they become so much important when a developer is managing a pipeline.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about being open source and being warehouse first, and we'll start with open source. So why open source? I mean, there are lots of different ways to launch a tech company, but you chose to launch as an open source repo on GitHub.
Yeah, I mean, like that's a great question. And I mean, unlike a lot of open source companies, like open source projects, I mean, we started a company with open source, right? Now, there are multiple reasons for that. Like, I mean, like we have kind of like the high level bullets with this, but the core thing is, I don't believe like in today's world, you can really build like a long lasting, strong company selling to developers without being open source. Because like how else, like if as a developer, like if I'm not a founder and if I was like looking at two solutions, right, one which is open source and one which is not, I'll always go with open source. Right? There's just this, like, I mean, this current generation of developers, we always grew up like trying open source, right? If I have to try a database, I'll always like, number one option would be MySQL, Postgres, Mongo, whatever. I mean, I'll not go and buy Oracle to like build an application, right? So it's just that like developers like love open source, and as a company, then it made very natural sense that yeah, we trying to sell to any company trying to sell to developers, they have to be open source, right? I mean, I strongly believe. So that was kind of the one of the core reasons. Right? That's the core value, right? Beyond that, there are more like business reasons also to be open source, right? As we have done all these enterprise deals, right? With like all the way from like small companies to like really large enterprises, right? Businesses also value open source. It's not just the individual developer, but the execs also value open source for all different reasons, right? Like transparency, right? I mean, like we are doing, and like they want to make sure that whatever is running in their infrastructure, they have complete access to the code, right? It's not opening any like back doors and Trojan horses and so on. So like non-open source is like not even a starter, right? So that this open source really works for that kind of use cases. No vendor lock-in, right? Like this is a very common problem with SaaS companies in general, right? I mean, if you're starting, you start using some product and you really get hooked into it, but then like they jack up the prices 10x. Like this happened with like our biggest competitor, and like everybody's upset, but they cannot move out. Now, because we are open source, we have a natural competition, right? I mean, like if we do that, a lot of our customers will switch to the open source product, which is like equally performant, right? So like this is it bad for the company? I don't think so, because this helps us to always like be honest about the value we are delivering to the company, and not like like I mean, like get customers hooked and like jack up the prices later. So yeah, I think, and definitely for the buyer, this makes total sense, and this gives them more lever. Finally, community, right? I mean, like a lot of the open source projects are built on community, right? Community contribution is extremely important. That's how the open source project gets started. This was like, because we are a VC funded company, it was less of an issue, because like we had engineers who were working on it. But like where it really helped for us was around integrations, right? I mean, we are finally integrating with like tens and hundreds of tools, right? And the community has been very helpful on like giving us like feedback, fixing issues on those integrations, which are very hard to like find out, like because I mean we just don't have that much like engineering power.
Sure. And I would say, you know, even though I haven't been here since the beginning, I came in when we were still very small, especially, you know, sort of early from a product perspective. In Maine, we've had some really good ideas come from the community that have turned into sort of key features, which has been just a really neat thing to see. That you know, of course, you can always get customer feedback, but it's such a different dynamic when you're helping someone with an open source tool and you're solving a really key problem for them, and then they're willing to give back to you. It's just a really neat dynamic. Okay, warehouse first. So one really unique thing that is such a drastic differentiator between RudderStack and a lot of the other CDPs and even data infrastructure tools out there is that we don't store any data. And you communicate that as a warehouse first mindset when it comes to the product and really even the whole customer data stack. So talk us through why you made the decision to build the product as a warehouse first product that doesn't store data.
Yeah, this is one of that thing, right, of CDP for developers, right? I mean, like if you know, I mean, it's kind of unfortunate that we have to highlight that like we are warehouse first, because if as an engineer, if I'm putting together a customer data stack, right, like the kind of use cases I talked about, right, bring customer data into some place and like do interesting things with that data, and then like activate that data, right? If you're building, any engineer is building that stack, like they have to like build it around some data store, right? like you cannot do it on a completely like a third-party SaaS where like they have complete access to the data and then you only get an API to look up specific profiles, right? How can you build applications on top? How can you run SQL queries? How can you train your machine learning models if everything, all your data is in with a third-party vendor that you only have like API access to, right? You cannot do anything like any interesting use case on top of that data. And so it's almost like no-brainer that a customer data platform should run on top of some data store, whether it's a warehouse, whether it's a data lake, whether it's like even a database like Postgres, but it has to be on top of some database, right? And like that's how it should be architected. But unfortunately, every other CDP is kind of architected the other way, right? I mean, maybe it makes sense for them when you're only selling to the marketeers and they don't want to control like data warehouse and they don't want to worry about like databases and so on, which makes sense. I understand that. But like when an engineer is trying to build the next generation CDP, it has to be like on some kind of a store that you control. Now, so that's kind of the baseline. Of course, like we enable that, and by not storing any data and like giving the entire data to our customers, you also get like some additional benefits, right? I mean, like data ownership with all the and privacy and security, right? With all these like GDPR and CCPA regulations, there is a very big focus on not like sending data to like third-party vendors. Like more and more enterprises are getting careful about like what data is being shared with whom and so on, right? So like, yeah, I mean, this is the other benefit of like not storing data in a warehouse first architecture where the warehouse is controlled by the customer. And then, I mean, I already talked about the last point where like, I mean, if once you have access to the data, then you can build like, you can train your machine learning model, you can run SQL queries, you can go crazy, right? That is not possible if your data is just available through like narrow APIs.
Sure. And I would say that really in the last several years, this has become even more exciting because of how much advancement there's been in the warehouse space, right? So now you have all sorts of interesting, machine learning as a service type functionality happening on the warehouses. And people are literally building applications on top of data warehouses, which sounds crazy, but the architectures and sort of tooling around that has become incredible. And so I think we're going to see some really, really interesting things in the next 5 years as that technology becomes even more advanced.
That's a great point. In fact, like I'd just like to highlight one of our customers' use case. Like, so they are dumping all the customer data into BigQuery. And BigQuery has this BigQuery ML where you can train a machine learning model on top of BigQuery, right? In using just SQL. You don't have to run like Python notebooks or anything. Like just a simple SQL query lets you train a model. And they built some kind of a churn prediction score just with SQL, BigQuery SQL. And that score, they're using that score to like send out free coupons to bring their like high likely to churn customers. And this end-to-end stack built with just RudderStack and BigQuery increased their revenue by 10%. So that was amazing. Like looking at the minimal effort they had to put at. They didn't have any data scientists. Like they had a couple of engineers who like put together this end-to-end use case. So yeah, this again, like you cannot build these use cases if you don't have access to the data, and the data is not in a warehouse like BigQuery.
Right. Yeah, it's really exciting. I think one dynamic we talk about a lot is that I think one of the really exciting things for sort of engineering teams and data engineers and people working on the stack is that we've spent a really long time out of necessity on low-level plumbing problems from a technical perspective, just because it's been really hard to get these things working. As the technology has advanced, though, now people are starting to work on things that are way more interesting and way more valuable because the low-level plumbing problems and sort of the available features like the ML stuff in BigQuery are allowing smaller teams to do way more than they ever could before, which is really exciting.
Yeah. The other thing I'll just add here is like the warehouses themselves have become so much more accessible. Like 10 years back or 12 years back before Redshift, like you have to go and buy Teradata, and like, I don't even know what other warehouse tools, right? Now you can like spin up a warehouse in like 2 minutes and pay like $100 a month and have a real warehouse you can scale up to like terabytes. So that was another big thing which is driving this this like use cases and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the cost of sort of storing and running queries on data is certainly decreasing, which is really exciting. Okay, let's talk through a few key features here in terms of the problems that RudderStack solves as a CDP for developers. So this one seems kind of obvious, but integrations is a really big challenge when you're building a customer data stack. And one thing I want to talk about specifically, of course, you want to send data to downstream marketing tools and sales tools and product analytics tools. But I think one of the things that's really interesting in the way that we've seen customers use RudderStack is integrating with core infrastructure tools. So in this screenshot, you can see Redis there, but we also support Kafka, we support Kinesis. We really support a lot of things that are sort of core pieces of internal components of data tooling. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and maybe why that was really important to you as far as our roadmap?
Yeah, I think it again goes back to the CDP for developers use case, right? And maybe I'll give a concrete use case. Like, yeah, I mean, getting the customer data is interesting, dumping it into a warehouse, building like reports, SQL and models, and the machine learning models is all that is exciting. But one of the big use cases is personalization, where you want to collect all this data and then drive your app personalization, whether it's like in-app recommendations or like email personalization, where next email to send or products to promote through RudderStack, right? So for the app personalization use case, what do you need, right? You need some kind of a profile store where you store your customer records. And then you want to update that profile store with recommendations. And then you want to consume that profile store in your app through an API. And that's how you want to personalize your app, right? So to do that, you need that like high performance key value store, something like Redis or Cassandra or any other key value store that you can look up from your app. But then the profile has to be created by someone. The profile has to be enhanced with recommendations from your machine learning model, right? So that pipeline becomes pretty complicated, right? You have to send your event stream to somewhere, train your machine learning models, take the outputs, sync it back to the profile store, initially create the profiles in that tool, right? So this pipeline gets pretty messy pretty fast. And this is what RudderStack really simplifies, right? You can literally connect RudderStack to Redis, and RudderStack will create those user profiles in Redis. Then you can connect, you can send that data into a warehouse. You can like build your machine learning models using BigQuery ML or whatever you like. And then you come up with some recommendations, and those recommendations you want to sync it back to Redis. Again, instead of you having to run the pipeline, RudderStack can do that, right? It will keep that data in sync. And now you have a rich profile in Redis with the user profile and all the recommendations that you can now consume in your app. So again, this may be like a complicated architecture to explain in words, but like these are the kind of use cases which are made really simple by RudderStack because of our integration. So it was again like back to our CDP for developers, right? We are not just enabling marketing, we are enabling every other function, of course, including like the engineering teams themselves. So yeah, those integrations are very important. So there are similar use cases for like Kafka and so on. Yeah, I don't want to like get into details. I mean, but we have like some content around that.
Sure. Yeah, I was talking with one of our customers and in the e-commerce space, he's actually using the Redis personalization architecture. And they made a really interesting point in that in e-commerce, you kind of have low-level out-of-the-box recommendations engines that kind of have a one-size-fits-all algorithm that maybe you can do some light customization on. But the gap between that and then actually delivering personalization with your own model is so big that it's almost impossible for small companies to build because it requires so much of those low-level plumbing challenges in terms of engineering work.
Yeah.
All right, transformations. This is probably our most loved feature, and it's can do so many different things, but talk through where did and actually I don't think I know this story. Where did the idea for transformations come from? And it's been around since the beginning, but it's become even more, it's become incredibly powerful at this point.
Yeah, this also came from like one of the use cases that we were trying to build at 8x8. It's a very simple use case. Every time there is a support request, like whether it's a chat or an email that is sent to our support tool, which was like Salesforce, like pull that data out, do some kind of like a simple machine learning sentiment analysis, and if it is a really upset customer and the sentiment is really bad, send a notification somewhere. Like in that case, we wanted to send to Gainsight, but like you could think of sending it to Slack or whatever, right? So an end-to-end use case where you are like getting an event, doing some transformations on it, which is like calling an API to figure out that sentiment and then sending it out, right? So it again made sense that like when you're building this pipeline of like collecting data and sending it out, you should have some function, some ability to write transformation code on that, right? So it was really that use case which we thought like, okay, it makes sense to do it. But then over time, we learned that there are so many different use cases of transformation, all the way from like simple fixing events, right? You ship your mobile app and you made some error, right? Some event name is spelled wrong and it's different from what was before, and you want to fix it, right? I mean, shipping a new version is hard, so you can just write a transformation. It's like a JavaScript function that you run and that runs on the backend. So the event comes in, the transformation fixes it, and then it goes to your warehouse or goes wherever, right? So that is a very, very commonly used use case. There are other use cases like PII scanning. You're getting all these events, but you're really not sure if your engineer is embedding PII like accidentally or whatever, right? But then there are regulations around like not sending PII to like your warehouse or your some other cloud tools, right? So you can write a transformation which gets rid of the PII. The example that we have here, which we use internally, is around Clearbit. Somebody signs up on the website, we want to send that record to Salesforce, but then we want to call Clearbit and enhance that record with additional fields before it hits Salesforce, right? Again, write a transformation which calls that Clearbit API and does that. So again, like it came from a very simple use case that we thought we should enable, but then over time, I mean, I didn't even expect it to be so popular, but like every customer we have is running some transformation.
Yeah, and I think, when you think about the PII use case, what makes it so interesting and so powerful is that we don't store any data, right? Yeah. So there's no data persisted. So when you remove the PII from a security and privacy standpoint, it just makes so much sense. API-based data governance. Now we have lots of features that we're working on around this that we won't talk about quite yet. But I think what I'd love to talk about is data governance is a huge topic. It's very complex in the modern data stack. And there are a lot of interesting solutions out there that are trying to solve this from sort of a team collaboration UI standpoint. But you made the decision to approach this API first, which makes sense from appealing to developers and building for developers. But explain that decision a little bit more and the thought behind it.
Yeah, and this is again something we learned from our customers. Like the core problem that we are trying to solve is like you have all these like hundreds of events being sent to RudderStack, right? Some coming from your mobile app, some from the website, and so on. And particularly if you're a large org, you may have like different teams sending events to your backend, and then those events are being sent to different places, right? So how and then you want some quality control, like for example, in your QA lifecycle, you want to make sure that all the events are conforming to like some standard. It could be as simple as like they don't have PII to as complex as like these are the keys, these are the values, all the required keys are present and so on, right? So like now if you want to like build that use case, and if you have like hundreds of kind of events and generated from different teams, how else would you do it, right? If you build a UI which shows that okay, now you have a violation, like who goes to the UI and checks that okay, now like this event is bad, this event is good. Like you cannot like scale that with like with just a UI, right? On the other hand, if you have an API that you can query, you can integrate that into your CI/CD pipelines, your nightly tests, whatever, right? So the API first approach makes so much sense. Like when talking to developers, right? It's kind of like a no-brainer. But again, like this was a learning that we had when we spoke to our customers.
Sure. And then we already talked about this a little bit, but talk about dev-friendly monitoring and alerting. So Grafana dashboards, integrations with Datadog, those are hugely popular features.
Yeah, and goes back to my previous point, right? Like if I'm managing this data pipeline, like a customer data pipeline and some kind of application on top, this is not the only thing I'm doing, right? I mean, I am responsible for like 3 other pipelines, and like some of them are internal pipelines and so on. And I probably have some kind of a monitoring tool to make sure everything is working, right? So it's either a Grafana, like Grafana is hugely popular with developers and so on, or if it could be like some kind of a paid solution like Datadog or like New Relic or something. And there are a bunch of variants. So it's kind of important that I have a single dashboard to do that. I don't want to like go to like 5 different dashboards to like check my status of my pipelines. So again, like very obvious thing when you're building for developers, but again, like a lot of our competition doesn't do that because like they are not selling to developers. They are building for the marketing persona. The marketing people don't come to Grafana, so they would rather have that data in like one integrated UI as opposed to like the tools they prefer.
Sure. Okay, well, we're coming up close to time here. I want to leave a few minutes for questions, but give us a quick couple minutes on what we're building next at RudderStack.
Yeah, I mean, like there is what we have. So there are multiple ways to answer this question, right? I mean, one is like what is immediate in the next quarter, and like I think the big focus for us are 2 things: like make sure that our pipelines are really mature, lots of integrations to build, like both on the source side as well as destination side. We are building this warehouse action, which is like taking like the category is now it's called reverse ETL, taking data out of your system and sending it to somewhere else. Although I don't like the term reverse ETL because like the use cases are all over, right? I mean, you also have the use case that I talked about where like you want to pull the Zendesk chat and then in real time do a sentiment analysis and send it back into Gainsight or Slack, right? Is that ETL? Is this reverse ETL? Or is it a combination of both, right? So like, yeah, but anyway, so there's a lot of things on the pipeline that we are working on beyond integrations. But one other big focus for us is also like around like data quality, data governance. Like this is again, we have learned talking to our customers is like bad events come in, that breaks reports. Like what tooling can we build around solving that? So I mean, again, like it's like we can probably do an entire webinar on that, but that's kind of like the high level what we are working on this quarter. So that's the short-term thing. The long-term vision is to like almost make your data pipelines like your plumbing in your home, right? I mean, you should not have to worry about that. It should just work. You shouldn't even see that, right? I mean, the aim is to make it really easy for you to develop these applications on top, right? Whether it's a machine learning application or it's a DBT model without worrying about the data pipeline. So again, like it may seem a bit hand wavy, but like we have a concrete plan to execute to that vision. So hopefully we'll have more innovation on that direction.
Very cool. All righty. Well, we have a couple minutes for questions. Feel free to raise your hand or type the question into the chat, and we would be happy to answer. I can also unmute you if you raise your hand, and you can ask about anything. We have the founder here, so anything you want to know, I guess, within reason. One question came through. What were you doing before 8x8?
Yeah, so I was the founder and CTO of this company called Mariana IQ. We were building like the next generation marketing automation system. So like an AI-driven system which like analyzes all the customer data and recommends what is the next best action, right? Send an email, make a call. Like, so that was kind of the vision. We like build parts of it. Like we build a lead scoring model. We built like and like some kind of a next action recommender and so on. It's a bunch of things we built around that vision. I don't want to take too long to answer that, but one thing I really learned there is like we sold to the marketing teams, and marketing teams really did not have a lot of data about their customers. Like they had some data about like maybe their email opens and website visits, but nothing beyond that. So building some of those use cases were really hard without that data, and that was the key learning there. I mean, marketing teams cannot build these things, and you need to be in the engineering org to do that.
All right, another question here, which is a great question. In terms of CDPs that are on the activation side, so the question is, for CDPs that do activation like emails, etc., do you compete with those CDPs or do you work with them?
Yeah, I mean, we are partners to them. I think like the way I think about it is like we are building a platform for developers to like collect all the customer data and then do things with that and then activate that. But then there are actually like concrete marketing use cases, right? There are use cases around like building customer journeys and like audiences and predictive audiences and so on, right? So there's strong marketing use cases, just like there are strong use cases for any vertical. So for the marketing use cases, that's not our strength. I mean, we don't sell to marketeers. We don't understand their use cases and so on. So like we partner with like those vendors who are like whose strength is that.
Sure. All right. We have another question here. Unless another one comes in between, we can end it after this one because we're close to the hour. What does the Series A change for RudderStack, and what does it mean for the company going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great validation of our vision and our belief. So I'm really excited about that. What it lets us do is, number one, like innovate more on the product and engineering side. There's so much to build before we are even close to our vision. So yeah, that will be a big focus. But also like go to market is another big focus. I think like there are a lot of companies who can benefit from a solution like that. So like really need to accelerate and grow that.
Great. Well, thank you, Soumyadeb. I know you were a very busy man and appreciate you taking the time. Thank you, everyone who joined. We'll send you a follow-up that has a link to the recording of this, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Thanks, Eric, for having me. It was really great doing this.
All right. Have a great day.